Well, ladies and gentlemen, a very good afternoon. It is great to have you with us as we go live on the F1 Experiences Instagram channel for yet another chat with a true legend, a true icon of Formula One. He'll be joining us in a few moments' time. Wherever you are joining us from, anywhere around the world, it is great to have you with us. And of course, we do hope that you're enjoying the action from the Italian Grand Prix, the one down there at the Mugello circuit. It's going to be a great race this weekend. Lots happening in Formula One this week. By golly, we've had Sergio Perez announced that he is leaving the Racing Point Formula One team, and then the very next day we had Sebastian Vettel announcing he is going to join the Racing Point Formula One team, being rebranded Aston Martin in 2021. But what with Sergio Perez? Where will he go? He could wind up at a number of teams. Alfa Romeo perhaps, maybe Haas, even Williams has been mentioned as well, even though they have secured their drivers for 2021. But today we are here to chat to a true living legend of the sport, someone who really needs no introduction, but let me give him one anyway. Of course, he is a 3 times Formula One world champion in 1969, 1971 and 1973. He made 99 Formula One starts. He had 27 wins during that time as well. And not to forget, of course, he had a number of different teams. We're just waiting for him to join us now. Of course, it is the legendary Sir Jackie Stewart, and he'll be joining us in just a few moments' time as the internet does its thing here. It's very exciting, this, and here he is. Ladies and gentlemen, joining us this afternoon, Sir Jackie Stewart. A very good afternoon, sir.
Hi, good afternoon. Is it James I'm speaking to?
It is indeed, Sir Jackie. How are you today?
So far, so good.
Excellent, excellent. We hope the sun is shining on you today, and thank you so much for taking the time to join us.
Oh, it's a pleasure. The sun is shining here in Switzerland. I don't know, I think it's the same in Italy right now.
It is. It is. It's looking pretty good at the moment, which is always good news. We like it when the sun is shining. So Jackie, again, thank you so much. This is a real highlight for me to be able to chat with you today. I've had a look over your career, as many followers of Formula One have, and so many highlights, so many things to talk about. But we've only got you for a limited amount of time, so we'll pick some real highlights. But maybe you could start by telling us how you even got the spark to get into motorsport and what led you to Formula One.
Well, motorsport came late by today's standards because there was no karting, there was no Formula Ford in my day. I was shooting for Scotland and Great Britain at trap shooting, Olympic trench, and I was all around the world doing that. It was only because I was a mechanic in a garage preparing cars for a very rich young man whose family trust would not allow him to race, but had other drivers. He had a Porsche Super 90 and an AC Bristol at the time. And I was the mechanic. And as a reward, he gave me the chance to drive. When I drove that car, a Courier Cos saw me driving because my brother used to drive for a Courier Cos. And then suddenly I was coming down south and I was being recognized by other people, and I was being picked up. I was picked up by Ken Tyrrell, obviously, for Formula 3, but a lot of other Lotus Elans and Lotus Cortinas and Cooper Monaco for a Courier Cos was an important way in. And then from Formula 3, BRM saw me, because in those days, most of the Grand Prix, certainly in Europe, the Formula 3 race, as it is today now, as we are watching this weekend, the Formula 3 guys are there. So they saw me winning. I won the European Championship as well as the UK one. And I got approached at the French Grand Prix in July. Would I be prepared to drive the following season instead of Richie Ginther, who was driving with Graham Hill? So that's the fast survey.
It's funny, I'm listening to you talk about these great names, these great icons in the sport, Graham Hill, Ginther, etc., of course, one of your great countrymen as well, of course, Jim Clark. Anybody that you raced against, that you, as you entered the sport, that you truly admired and looked up to?
Oh, no question, Jim Clark. Jim Clark, today, for Jackie Stewart, is still number 2 in the world of all time drivers. Fangio is up there at the top. Then there's Jim Clark, and then there's a bit of a rustle as to see who comes in after that. But Jimmy was so smooth, so clean. That's why, his Lotuses didn't break down very often because he was so gentle with the car. Most of these, there was more people killed at that time in Grand Prix Lotuses because if you drove them aggressively, they were a very fragile car, very fast, terrific grip. In comparison to a BRM, it felt like I drove the Lotus Formula One car at the Rouen Grand Prix before the season started in '66, and it felt I drove the Lotus because Jim Clark had throwing snowballs down in the land. They were having the new Cortina out, and he slipped a disc. So Colin Chapman said, would I drive the Lotus? Now, I was driving the BRM testing by that time, and I drove the Lotus, and it was unbelievable, the grip. But again, you had to be gentle with it, and Jim Clark was the gentle master of it, better than anybody else other than Fangio, in my opinion.
Well, you mentioned a gaggle of drivers there, potentially in that third slot on the greatest of all time. And there are some that say that you are, in fact, the greatest of all time. So in your own opinion, would you slot yourself in there at number 3?
It would have to be the very best number 3. Well, it was a different time. First of all, the tracks were different. There was no safety. There was no runoff areas. There were no deformable structures. The cars were, very dangerous to have an accident, and you were sitting on petrol. The seat was petrol. You were sitting on a petrol can. It was molded into the car and molded to your body, and it was on both sides. A whole lot of different things that you had to accommodate for that today you simply don't have to. And even by the time I retired, and I was only, 33 or 34, I can't remember, it had changed. From the 60s with a 1500cc engine to double the size, a 3000cc engine. And suddenly the cars were so much faster, the entries to the corners were so much faster, but the accidents were therefore so much bigger. And that's why so many people were killed. And I was the president of the GPDA in those later years and was able to try and change the safety, not only of the tracks, but also the cars, because some of them were incredibly fragile. But it was I think it's always been like that. Whether you talk about the 20s with Nuvolari and Caracciola, whether you talk about the times of Fangio and Moss, whether you time, as it went on, there's always been one or two people outstanding. At the moment, Lewis Hamilton is outstanding. Fangio, the difference was that Fangio knew where to go every year. He would change from Maserati to Ferrari to Mercedes to Lancia. So that doesn't happen anymore. So it was a different period.
Yeah, absolutely. You have mentioned, of course, you became very outspoken about safety after your rather large crash at Spa in 1966, and a raft of changes were brought in as a part of you being so outspoken. What are you most proud of all the changes that came following on from your accident, and of course discussions about safety?
Safety is the capital letter when it comes to that. Closing the Nürburgring, it's the greatest racetrack in the whole world, and I won quite often there in Formula 2 as well as Formula 1. But it was ridiculous, 187 corners per lap, no runoff areas, not enough firefighters, not enough marshals. There would be crashed cars from the touring car race beforehand sitting on the side of the road when the Formula 1 race was on. It was crazy. It was just yesteryear not growing up to today and tomorrow as owners of racetracks and as organisers. So it had to be changed. And the Grand Prix Drivers Association at that time was very virile. We got a lot done. It had to be done. People were being killed all the time. Helen, my wife, 57 people she killed that were holidaying with us, staying with us, traveling with us, racing with us, all died. And nothing was done about it. So it had to be done. So I was very unpopular for a long time. I had a death threat at one time after we closed the Nürburgring, but we closed Spa as well. I had an accident in Spa, and there was nobody to get me out of the car. Graham Hill and Bob Bodgerant took me out of the car. There was no first aid. There was nothing. There was nothing there at all. So therefore, this is where the change has happened. And luckily now, look at the accidents we're seeing, and people walk away. Fantastic. I mean, that if I did anything in my career, that was probably the best thing I ever did. I mean, the driving was wonderful. I mean, I loved it. And I was driving with fantastic people. I mean, Jim Clark, Graham Hill, Dan Gurney, just an amazing group of people. Jack Brabham, Denny Holm, Jackie Hicks. I mean, at that time, any of them could have won the World Championship. And of course, because of the Cosworth engine, everybody's using the Cosworth engine except the Ferraris. So therefore, it was a very level playing field, completely different than today.
Yeah. You've mentioned some great gladiators, and I have to call them gladiators of the sport, yourself included. And I want to just touch on somebody that you raced for, and you mentioned him earlier. Is Ken Tyrrell? Of course, he led you to the championships in 71 and 73. What was the relationship like with Ken as you journeyed throughout your career?
Oh, terrific! I trusted him with my life. I trusted him with my wife. I trusted him in every way that I can think of. He was a wonderful team owner, the like of which I've never seen then, before, or since. I mean, Neubar was, of course, great for Mercedes-Benz, and what is happening at Mercedes-Benz today is very impressive too. But again, it was a different world. In my time, we went to a Grand Prix with 8 or 9 people, including Ken Tyrrell and his wife, and Helen for timekeeping and lap charting. So 7 mechanics usually to look after 2 cars. Francois Sever and myself, or Beltoise and myself, or other people that I drove for while driving for Ken. So it's nothing that you can compare per se, but every now and again, a very special person arrives. And one of my great regrets, Ken Tyrrell was never recognised for anything like as much as what he did for British motorsport. And, the Cosworth people, for example, same thing. World beaters. In our country today, our motorsport industry is bigger than aerospace right now, because the kind of people they were creating the future and exciting everybody. You talk to anybody of the more mature within the Formula Ones now in talking about mechanics and these people, they remember the lesser days, but it was just as competitive. In fact, maybe more competitive, because 8 or 9 10 out of 15 or 20 were all the same engines. And by the way, the grid was a lot quicker, sometimes 35, 40 people on the grid.
Yeah, Ken Tyrrell was certainly an innovator, and I guess the six-wheeler was something that when they introduced it to you and talked to you about, of course you were retired by then, but when you heard about it, I understand you spat your drink out and said, "What is this? That's never going to fly." Is that a true story?
Yeah, and I did drive the car too, not when I had drunk the car. It was strange, but it was aerodynamic. The front, aerodynamics, it was supposed to be better. It won a couple of races, but it wasn't going to be long term, and in fact it was banned by the FIA. So therefore it came to an end probably correctly. I don't think there was a place for it, but Cosworth had started to make a car, four-wheeler, and I think other people would have done too. And who knows, it could have been successful, but I drove the car, I think, at Paul Ricard. After I had retired, and Ken wanted me to try it out, and it was okay. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't good enough.
Well, it's certainly a great chapter in the history of Formula One, that is for sure. Let's talk about all the tracks that you raced on over your time in Formula One. There are some that no longer appear on the calendar, and there are some that have been and gone. And you've mentioned obviously Spa and the Nürburgring. They are heavily changed from when you were racing in your prime. So is there one track that stands out for you as the one that when you go to bed at night, that's the one that you dream about?
Well, still the Nürburgring. I mean, it was still the master of them all, the giant challenge, wet or dry. I mean, I won one year at the Nürburgring in the wet. I won by 4.2 minutes or something like that. It was a series win for me, but it was because it was just a terrible day. But the other great racetrack, which we don't race on now, is Clermont-Ferrand. A very good racetrack. I mean, that was a challenge. That was the little Nürburgring. It was tough racetrack, huge topography, just up and down all the time, very fast as well. Great challenge, one of the best I've ever had as a racetrack.
At 34 years of age, you decided to walk away from Formula One. You just won your third Formula One World Championship. Was that something that you had always had going on in your mind? You were going to win 3 and walk away, or was it something that happened over the course of the season?
No, it was well planned. I decided in April that I wanted to retire. I didn't tell anybody other than Ken Tyrrell, Walter Hayes, and one other good friend at Ford Motor Company, because they were deeply involved. I had had the best years of Jackie Stewart's life, I think, as a driver. I was still driving as well as I'd ever driven, but I just thought it was time to stop. Commercially, I had also I had a long-term contract with Goodyear, a long-term contract with Ford, a long-term contract with Elf, because I think I was with Elf for 19 years.
Wow.
Rolex, I'm still with them. That's 53 years that I've been with them. Morton Chandon, because I was the first to spray champagne in Formula One, I'm still with them. That's 51 years. So commercially, I had sort of prepared myself for what I thought would come after being a racing driver. And I generally thought that it would last 5 years. And then I would have to look for a job. Keeping in mind that I was just a mechanic when I started with no money at all. So I was very worried about supporting Helen, Paul and Mark longer term. And of course, because Formula One became commercial during my time, because with VRM, there wasn't a name on the car. And there wasn't a name in the car of several of them at the beginning. But when it started to become really commercial, that for me was my future. And I've got a belief that you've got to under-promise and over-deliver. And if you do that, you never get the sack. So therefore, I learned from very good people like Walter Hayes at Ford Motor Company, for Elf, one of the greatest men in marketing I've ever been with, was head of motorsport for Elf, and lots of others who allowed me to see a life beyond actually driving. And I'm still going to Grand Prix races. I'm going to Portugal for both Heineken and Rolex. So I've got 2 major multinationals that I'm still deeply involved with. And so I think a lot of the drivers have to look at this. I was just thinking the other day about our Ferrari driver who I thought was going to retire, Vettel. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking, he's the perfect man to do what I did, because he presents himself well, he speaks well, and I think he could be a great ambassador to the sport. Now, he does want to drive still, which is my disappointment in a way, because I think looking at where I am today and the privileges I've enjoyed in Formula One, and he's won more races than, I think he's 4 world championships, hasn't he?
Mm-hmm. Correct.
So, and the great thing about Formula One that we are talking about and living with at the present time is totally global. So when I was with Ford and Goodyear and Rolex and so forth, I was in different countries almost every week. And you were servicing those because everybody in the world drives a car, even then. And therefore, if you're at the top of your sport, you wouldn't need any introduction for Vettel to go in to Buenos Aires or Brazil or go up South America and then go to North America and then do Europe and the Middle East and the Far East commercially, he would still be a powerful man and a very good ambassador for the sport. So
He would be.
I was lucky that I was maybe the first to do it that way because, when I was in America racing in America, but I was doing ABC's Wide World of Sports, and they got me, I won the American Sportsman of the Year because I was doing commentary at Indianapolis and Daytona and Talladega and Darlington and stock car racing and sprint car racing at Terre Haute, as well as the Indy 500. So I got a lot of experience, and commercially I became more valuable. So Formula One, I think in any sport that I can think of, is better at projecting your future if you're a top-line individual and you present yourself well, you dress properly, you speak properly, you represent your product correctly. Federer's going to be very good at that, I think, as a sportsman. And
Absolutely.
that's the sort of thing. That's why my motor racing is still here today. That's why you're talking to me now. Just because of the past, and I'm still here.
Yeah, and what an icon you are. And of course, we are looking forward to seeing you in the paddock in Portugal when F1 Experiences returns as well. You've just mentioned there the wide world of sports, and of course, you're iconic during your time of covering many sports there. What was your favourite race to cover during your time at Wide World of Sports?
Indy.
Yeah.
Because it was such a big deal then. There was 450 to 500,000 people at the race and at qualifying. And practice, there was tens of thousands of people up there. And it was the biggest sport. The Super Bowl was very big, but Indianapolis was just as big, huge. And I had the best commentators. Jim McKay was the best commentator I've ever worked with. Murray Walker would be up there as well. But he was a real professional and great command of the English language for an American, way above anybody else I had ever met. And there was the producer was the best producer. Roone Arledge was the president of ABC Sports and News. A hugely clever man. So I worked with them, but I was lucky enough to work with Henry Ford II and Edsel Ford, who's still in Ford Motor Company, and the same applied to Goodyear. When you're at the very top of your sport, like Lewis Hamilton is today, or like Vettel is, in my opinion, the entree going through the door is made an awful lot easier by who you are. And I saw that, and that's part of the reason I decided to retire, because I saw another life ahead of me. And I still love the sport today as passionately as I've ever loved it. But I'm still there enjoying it and watching it and being part of it.
Yeah. Yeah. And of course, you were a big part of it when you decided to set up your very own Formula One team, Stewart Racing, 97 to 99. How did that come about? And of course, we can't forget that you run it alongside your son as well, which must have been a wonderful experience.
Well, it all started with Paul. He suddenly decided he wanted to be a racing driver. Just the last thing Mummy and Daddy wanted. But when we did it, I said, right, we'll have our own team, because then I would get the best mechanics. And right away, I took a Formula One mechanic to lead Paul's racing in Formula Ford, then Formula Vauxhall, then Formula 3, then Formula 3000. And all the time we're building up from half a dozen people to 100 people. Then getting into Formula One was 200, 250 people. But these mechanics, it was a staircase of talent that I thought was the right way to go, not only for Paul, but when Montoya was there, Castroneves was there, David Coulthard was there. A huge number of the best drivers in the world came up through Paul Stewart Racing. They had to dress properly. They had to go to public speaking courses, because I wanted them representing the team properly and explaining to our sponsors that we had, and we had fantastic sponsors, in the lesser formulas before we got even to Formula 3000 or Formula 1. And we dressed them, because when you walk into a big office in a big multinational corporation, you've got to look right. And racing drivers weren't necessarily doing that. Stirling Moss did it correctly, but not too many others. And that's why we did so well. We had the best mechanics, we had the best drivers, we had quite good management. We'd been there before, and for Paul, he was working very hard on it. And when it came to Formula One time, that was a huge challenge. I mean, against, at that time, of course it was Ferrari, but of course it was McLaren and Williams, basically, were the three big teams. And the others were always financially on the limit. And I never wanted to be in that. So we had Formula One, Stewart Grand Prix, with Ford Motor Company, because they supplied our engines and paid for the cost of the number one driver. And it really worked really well, to a point where Ford Motor Company thought we were getting more out of it than they were and wanted to buy the company. Just what a Scotsman needed. Because the Scotsman didn't want to sell, because it was a family business. But in the end, we did sell, and again, we did, that was correct. But we never had an overdraft. In Formula One. We never had any debt, and everybody was paid on time. And we never took the money out. We never lost any money. We made minimum £5 million a year doing it, but we just put the money back in. But because of doing it in that way, when we sold it, there was no debt. So that turned out to be good for everybody. But the first year we were second in Monte Carlo, second to Schumacher. Rubens Barrichello drove a great race and genuinely finished second correctly. It wasn't through attrition. And can you imagine Paul and I in tears? And when the podium was given, that time the drivers went up, of course, but the chief mechanic didn't go up, or the team principals didn't go up, and we suddenly got a call. We were running around looking for, Rubens and so forth amongst the crowd of the media. And they said, His Serene Highness wants you both to come up to the podium. So Paul and I were taken up onto the podium. I mean, what a day it was. And then, of course, we won the German and European Grand Prix. And we had a pole position, and we had a fastest lap.
Yeah. And how special was that first victory, Johnny Herbert, at the Nürburgring, mind you, in 1999? Pretty special, I'd imagine.
Fantastic. And Rubens was third. Good as almost another few laps, he would have been first and second. But to have two cars on the podium at that stage, and I had to go on the podium because Pasquale was the man of the time organising the podium and so forth. And I get rushed off to go on the podium. I said, what am I doing on the podium? Well, you've got to be there as the owner, the constructor, and so forth. So I've got a great picture here somewhere of the podium with the three of us there. It was a dream come true.
Yeah, I can imagine. And of course, we mentioned earlier that you're still attending Formula One races now in your ambassador role for not only Formula One, but also Rolex, Heineken as well. Who's your favourite person to stop and talk to in the paddock in terms of drivers these days? Do you love to have a chat with Lewis or Daniel Ricciardo or Esteban Ocon? Who's your favourite to stop and have a chat?
Ricciardo and Vettel. And some of the very young drivers. I love to see for somebody like me, and particularly my age, and having gone through the whole process of the staircase, it's so refreshing to see the enthusiasm and the ambition. And I'm lucky enough to get access to that, because I take people with Heineken and with Rolex. We have headsets that I take them around the paddock, and I introduce them to as many people as I can. And for them, it's a dream to meet a big name. But to meet one of the puppies is somewhat even better sometimes. Uh, because it's great to see that. And when you get to Formula One, you're no longer a puppy, but you are within that category of the sport, that that class. So, no, I mean, I have a lovely life with it. This is an interruption to it. This terrible, this virus, we've never seen the like, and this is worse than any war that we've ever seen, with a number of people being lost and affected. So, but motor racing is coming through it very well. I mean, our Formula One races today, I mean, I take my hat off to F1. The manner in which they're doing it, the television coverage is sensational. I just think, of course, it's very popular because we've even got more cars on the road than we've ever had before. I said to somebody the other day, we've got more people driving cars in India than the combined total of car owners in America and Canada. And the same applies to China. So when you take a Grand Prix out there and you see the best drivers in the world, better than Indianapolis, better than Daytona, better than anywhere, and you see the best and most sophisticated engineering. I mean, I'm using Formula One. My wife, unfortunately, Helen, who was my timekeeper and my lap charter, has got dementia. And I've got a thing called Race Against Dementia. I'm sending all our young PhDs to McLaren and Red Bull to see how problem solving is done like that. And Formula One is a fantastic example. The Formula One we have today, Britain PLC, is the capital for the world. And I'm glad that I can still have access to that. So the sport, I don't think has ever been any better than it is today, even in such troubled times.
Indeed, and I agree with you totally. Hats off to Formula One for the way that they have been able to restructure and keep us racing throughout this time of this great pandemic. And so, Jackie, you mentioned that Race Against Dementia. It was a charity that you set up in 2018, something that's very dear and very personal to you. Can you tell us a little bit about the origins of the charity, why you set it up, and what your targets are?
Because Helen got dementia recognized in the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota about 6 years ago, and it gets worse. Nobody has a cure yet for dementia. Nobody has anything that softens the experience either. It's ridiculous. Over 40 years, billions have been spent. There's been no fix. That's why I think Formula One has a role to play in finding problem solving. So I got into, we've got to raise money for it. It's a very good charity. In fact, that is a broken D for Race Against Dementia. And it costs more money to keep a dementia patient than the combined total of cancer and heart disease. And now, everyone who's been born today, 1 out of 3 is going to have dementia. That's the projection.
Goodness.
So if you think about all of that element, I mean, Jackie Stewart's doing it, but an awful lot of other people need to do it and need to find a way. There's no preventive medicine and there's no corrective medicine. I mean, that's not true of cancer. That's not true of heart disease. So we've got to find a cure. And I think the motor racing mindset, and Formula One particularly, is a good example. We need to raise money because we pick up the best young PhDs everywhere in the world, because now of the internet that we're on right now reaches everybody we want to know with their grades and what universities, medical universities that they've been in. We pick them up. It costs us between £500,000 and £1 million, 500,000 and £1 million for each of them, because we've got to sign them for a minimum of 5 years. So we need money to do that. And still there's much less money being given to dementia, or Alzheimer's even, than goes to cancer. So I'm hoping that we can do something in my lifetime. I want to see it. Not just because of Helen, but because of the condition of the whole world.
Indeed, indeed. And of course, you faced many challenges throughout your career and won many incredible races. And I hope that this race is one that absolutely we win as well. Can I just touch on something that you've mentioned earlier? And it's something that's come through in the questions because we've been bombarded with questions for you, Sir Jackie, from all of the people that are following us on social media. You mentioned it earlier. It's that you were the origin of the spraying of champagne in Formula One. It's a story that you've told many times before, but I'm sure that there are many followers who have never heard it. So perhaps enlighten us. How did this come about?
Well, I won the race. And when you go onto the podium, the president of France was on the podium because Clermont-Ferrand was the racetrack, and that's, of course, the home of Michelin, and it's a big industry. So the prime minister had to come to get the winner. They had left a double magnum of champagne on the podium before the start of the race. And in those days, it was probably today's temperature it would certainly been 35 degrees. And it stayed there. So I get presented, big podium thing, I get presented with the champagne, and then there's the champagne arrives. The Count Frederick Chandon, Monty Chandon, who's still alive today, a great man, is with one of his pals, and he's got the double magnum. And the Prime Minister says, "Oh, you must share the champagne and the trophy, we can bring it. Open the champagne, Jackie." So Jackie, and suddenly the thing just goes bang. And I tell you, without fear of contrast, it was 20 feet high. Because of the temperature, the heat, it just shot off. The cork, God knows where it went. I'm Scottish, right? I don't want to see anything wasted, so I put my thumb on the top. The harder I put my thumb, the further the champagne went. So it was going like 30 meters. And then I learned that I could knock off all the media people 30 meters away. So it became that was where it started. Dan Gurney had actually done it at Le Mans the previous year, maybe the same year, no, maybe previous year. But anyway, I got it first in Formula One, and the Frederick Champagne man, the Count Frederick, chairman of the board, Jackie, we've got to do this at every race. We must have a contract.
Amazing. And I've got to ask. Daniel Ricciardo is quite famous for his shoey when he pours the champagne into the shoe. Is that something you would have even contemplated during your career?
No, and even having to try and do it, and I did have to try and do it, and I faked it. I put it up, but I didn't drink it. Don't tell him. But that, that was his angle, and it was great. It certainly caused a lot of attention, and I think worry by the guys who were drinking out of his. Yeah. It's not for me, and I have to say you're an incredibly brave person to even try and attempt that kind of thing. Now we are just about out of time, and apologies to all of those that we haven't been able to pose your questions today. But we've got a lot of changes coming up in Formula One, and of course the sport is always evolving, and we've got our budget cap coming up with new technical regulations coming in 2022, and this sport is going to continue to evolve over the years. Do you feel confident in the future of our sport? Absolutely. The motor car is always going to be there, and people want to see the highest level of motor vehicle transportation, and that's Formula One. And all the major companies, there's new major companies coming in with the new Formula One people. But, look at Rolex, look at Heineken. They were never involved in motorsport before, because Freddie Heineken said on the Bible of what to do in the family business, there will be no motorsport. Now, I managed to persuade them otherwise, but that's a global product using a global sport. It's not like American football. It's not just like even soccer in Europe and the rest of the world. It's even bigger than that, because not everybody kicks the football. Everybody drives a car. So I think its long-term success is there because we've got clever people running it and we've got good people involved in it. And the motor vehicle is still going to be a challenge, whatever it may be, whatever the regulations do change. Money is an issue. And I think it needs levelling out. There's no question. Because of the cost of what Mercedes-Benz are putting in and the sponsors that Mercedes-Benz have on the car, because they sponsor because they know they're going to get global reach and global recognition. And the Malaysian oil company Petronas are there big time, but so are also the other good quality companies. And that applies to a great many of the teams, with Red Bull, for example, a global product. What they've had out of it is fantastic. And what Sport have had, because they've been there, is also fantastic. So I think we're going to see more multinational corporations involved. I can see the sports better. We now get G-force readings as we're watching the television. We've got speeds watching the television. We've got the amount of great braking, the G-forces watching television. That's all new. But Formula One's always changing, and it's always getting better. And it's global.
Yeah, we've got an exciting future, and we are certainly looking forward to it. But let's talk about, just quickly to end with, the immediate future. We've got a race this weekend at Mugello. So first part, who do you think is going to win that? And second of all, do you think Lewis Hamilton will win the World Championship again this year?
Oh, I think that's a foregone conclusion. Lewis will win it. The combination of Mercedes-Benz and Lewis Hamilton at the present time, unquestionably. I mean, he drives well. We don't know how well yet because he's had no real opposition yet. But I can, my Jackie Stewart's saying he drives it extremely well. So I think that's somewhat of a problem at the moment. It's been going on too long. The one, one name, one driver, success all of the time. It makes it a little boring. So we need to see some change. But there are other young drivers coming up, and there's other new investments in Formula One. So I think we will have a better change. How Ferrari got themselves in the position that they did for the last Grand Prix is beyond my comprehension, because they have probably more money in it than even Mercedes-Benz.
Yeah.
And yet they didn't get the job done, and they haven't had it done now for some time. But they'll be back because they've never not responded in some way or another. But I see a very healthy future for the sport, and the drivers. I mean, that young Australian that you mentioned earlier, what a man he is! What a I mean, he lights up the whole paddock. Which I think is wonderful, and there's a lot of the other drivers too coming in are personalities. So I think we've got a long service ahead of us.
Yeah, absolutely. And just finally, your tip for this weekend. We had a very surprising podium in Monza. Do you think we'll see the same at Mugello, or will it be?
I've got the Formula One. They sent to me this. This is only the first segment, and Stroll is third last. Perez is second last. What's going on there? There's something going on there that's caused that. Whether it's a mechanical that will be fixed for this afternoon, I don't know. But I mean, still, you've got Bottas at the top, so you've got Mercedes-Benz up there. Then you've got Red Bull. Then you've got Ferrari, ironically. De Klerk's up there, third fastest in the first session. Some of the drivers have never raced there before. That might have been a problem some years ago, but not now, because the simulators that every team has now, when they get to the racetrack, they could almost close their eyes because they know where to go left, right, and centre, and they know the braking distances. So it might have taken Jackie Stewart 14 to 20 laps to go into a brand new Formula One circuit. That doesn't happen today. The boys have been in the simulator the whole way, so they know every ripple. I'm surprised, but this is only the first section. The second one we're going to be watching, all of us watching, you and I now, are going to tell us what's going to happen in the real time.
Yeah, Yeah, well, we're looking forward to it. It's going to be a great race this weekend. And so, Jackie, I could speak to you for hours, but I know that we do have to let you go. So, on behalf of everybody watching and everybody who's going to watch this on Instagram television later, thank you so much for your time today. You're an absolute icon, a true legend of Formula One, and we can't thank you enough for your time today.
Well, I've got the time, and if you want me, call me.
So, Jackie, have yourself a wonderful afternoon, and our best regards to your lovely wife as well.
Well, thank you very much for that. That's more important than anything.
A pleasure. Thank you, Sir Jackie. Ladies and gentlemen, an absolute pleasure to be chatting to Sir Jackie Stewart today here on the F1 Experiences Instagram channel. A true legend of Formula One, and what a great man. And please do support the Race Against Dementia charity. Please do. It is a fantastic charity. And of course, as Sir Jackie says, he'd like to beat that during his lifetime, and I'm sure that together we can do that. F1 Experiences will be back on Saturday chatting to David Croft live from the circuit at Mugello as we wrap up qualifying. And as Sir Jackie says, it's all a little bit topsy-turvy at the moment as the drivers get acquainted with this circuit and also learn the twists and the turns of Mugello. And maybe Ferrari could be back up there once again if you are a Ferrari fan, of course. Have yourself a... excuse me, have yourself, I'm so emotional, have yourself a wonderful afternoon, and we look forward to catching up with you again on Saturday here on the F1 Experiences Instagram channel.